My name is Aaron Pednati, and today I am interviewing James Howard Kunstler at the Mouzon House. For those of you who don't already know, James is a nationally prominent commentator on a number of interrelated topics. The issues about which he has written include urban planning and infrastructure, suburban sprawl, civic design, and the long-term trajectory of our petroleum-dependent society. He is the author of many acclaimed works of nonfiction. These include The Geography of Nowhere, which critically examines the physical and social landscape of suburban America, and The Long Emergency, which explores the potential impact of petroleum depletion and climate change on humankind. In addition to his nonfiction works, James is also the critically acclaimed author of many novels. Most recently, these include World Made by Hand, The Witch of Hebron, and A History of the Future, a trilogy of books which depicts the efforts of a fictional small town in upstate New York to cope with the consequences of peak oil and the end of the automotive age. Anyone who has ever seen him talk publicly knows that James is an extremely engaging, entertaining, vivid, and humorous speaker. He has been featured on many television programs and on TEDx, and he often gives lectures at colleges and universities around the country. James also happens to be a former resident of Saratoga Springs, where he lived for many years. Because he has written and commented upon issues of urban planning and civic design in Saratoga on many occasions, he struck me as a good person to consult about the city center's proposed plan to build a parking garage in the parking lot outside this window. So, James, thanks for taking the time to talk with me today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so as you know, the city center wants to build its parking garage on the last remaining parcel of undeveloped publicly owned land in Saratoga Springs. And once it's built, it will be leased to the city for 10 years. I want to start out by asking you whether you think this garage is a good use of money, resources, and publicly owned downtown space. If so, why? And if so, why not?
I kind of think that I would call it a misinvestment.
Okay. Because
it happens to be my view of things that we're closer to the twilight of our mass motoring society than we are to the middle, and that it would be unfortunate to make a 30-year investment in car storage at this point in our history, because this is millions and millions of dollars.
Right.
And I simply think that we need to start making other arrangements for the future of this town. By the way, I want to mention I moved about 14 miles east of town. I still have, I still do a lot of things in this town. It's still part of my social network, and I'm still sort of part of the life of this town, right, though I'm not living here anymore.
And the town to which you moved is
Greenwich, New York.
Okay, and that area is what you deal with in your most recent fiction.
Yeah, Washington County's been the setting of these novels I've been writing about the post-petroleum future. But not to put too fine a point on that, I think it's also more a question of not what you don't do with that land. It's more a question of what you do with that land. Mm-hmm. And my view of that would be that this is not only the last completely undeveloped parcel, literally at the core of town, but it's also a coherent block. Mm-hmm. It really ought to be redeveloped as a great urban block with great urban buildings that are appropriate to where it is, the center of town.
Right.
And I have some quibbles with the recent orgy of redevelopment that's gone on in town. I think on the whole it's been a great thing for this town. I think the urban design aspects of it have been excellent. The fact that they're good multi-story urban buildings that have retail on the ground floor and have brought a lot of live bodies living in the core of the city.
Right.
On the whole, though, the footprint of each building has been, I think, larger than would be ideal. I don't think the height is a bad thing. A lot of people complain about the height. I don't think that's a problem. I think the problem is more of the fact that each individual building is so massive that they have to pretend to break it up into smaller units to pretend that it's made of smaller. Now you can regulate that. I mean, you can pass a code that says, you know, each building can have a maximum frontage of 40 feet or 25 feet, and that would be consistent with the historic pattern of the city. It tends to not be consistent with what are called the construction staging habits and customs that we've developed recently, which tends to promote the wish to develop a huge parcel all at one time. And that ends up being, you know, having a kind of problematical outcome. But, you know, I think that would be the best use if we were really a forward-looking community. We'd be thinking more about normal urban fabric than just car storage. Car storage is a pretty, you know, it's not really the highest and best use for such an important piece of land. Right.
So what you're sort of getting at when you talked about the positive side of the types of development that's going on was the idea of mixed use. You know, buildings that are, you know, offices and have commercial use on the ground floor and also residential uses. Maybe could you unpack that concept a little bit more?
Well, you know, first of all, I think we've had more good redevelopment in Saratoga Springs, pound for the size of the city, than just about any place in the United States. You know, on the basis of the population of the city and how many new buildings that behave well. You know, you might not like the architecture. You know, I think the architectural quality has lagged a little bit behind the urban design quality. You know, in terms of the detailing of the buildings and stuff. But you know, it's been such a long time since we built that kind of stuff that we kind of got rusty at it. But we're now pretty good at the urban part of it, and you know, we understand how to get apartments in town and how to make them work. And we understand that the retail has to be, you know, facing the street. And I think that you know, 15 years now of pretty aggressive redevelopment has educated the developers in town to do it pretty good.
So that's the sort of thing that you think you'd like to see out here?
I think it would work better with the neighborhood that is here, the neighborhood that is redeveloping around here, and the neighborhood that will be here in the future.
Okay. So also, like, maybe a specific sense of what particular uses buildings in this area right here could be put to, aside from car storage?
It would probably be a benefit if the people on the planning board and the design review board actually accessed the historic photographs of the city and of this part of the city and got an idea of you know, what traditional urban buildings actually are and how they behave, because you know, the cultural memory of that has been kind of erased. And you know,
eviscerated perhaps.
In particular, the design review module of this public debate has been kind of lame, because we don't really have a, and you know, even back in the time when I lived here, we didn't have a design review board that made decisions based on norms and standards of excellence. They tended to make it on the basis of their personal mood or their personal taste, or you know, whether their wife yelled at them that morning or something. And you really need standards, you know, of reference of what a good building is. For example, you know, you can have a consensus or an agreement that says, you know, the windows have to be vertical, you know, or that you know, that the facade of the building has to contain a certain percentage of, you know, masonry and glass, so that you don't get glass boxes, or that you know, the transition line between, you know, the sidewalk and the second floor is a certain height, so which would allow you to get a storefront more than 8 feet high. Because the fact of the matter is, you know, people don't really like going into 8-foot high storefronts and restaurants. They prefer to have a, you know, a grander ceiling. But you know, it's been so long since we built buildings properly of that type in America that we forgot. So you might have to put it into the code to remind people. And You know, there are other cities in the world where those are coded. In fact, when the prefect of Paris, Baron Haussmann, in the 1850s and 60s, presided over the redevelopment of Paris and created the great boulevards of Paris that we know today, and the City of Light that we know today. They had very strict guidelines about what, you know, where the second floor would start, and, you know, where the cornice would go, but within those, you know, rather rigorous orders of unity, they got very, very diverse, you know, expressions of architecture. So you need orders of unity to give you a workable diversity in the architecture.
Right, and that's something that the Saratoga Comprehensive Plan is also, you know, trying in some way to gesture towards. The notion of a city in the country and sustainable development and buildings that kind of mesh overall with a sort of landscape.
Well, those happen to be a little bit fuzzy, and that's a little bit of the problem, is that, you know, we haven't been explicit enough in some ways. We've been a little too timid about setting actual codes and rules, and sometimes our rules work against us. For example, let me give you an example of a problematical one. You know, we have height restrictions in various districts of the city. You know, 35 feet high in a residential district, or maybe, you know, I don't know, 60 feet high here. You know, that produces unforeseen consequences that are not good. For example, the Hampton Inn, because they wanted to get, you know, 5 or 6 stories, whatever it is, you know, within this height restriction, they ended up squashing down the ground floor in a weird way, so that half of it is below grade and half of it is above grade, and it kind of doesn't work very well.
Right.
You know, instead of stating the rule in terms of, you know, the restriction will be 5 stories or 6 stories. You know, that way they could have had a proper ground floor. They wouldn't have been trying to cram all these stories within the 60-foot envelope.
Right.
But you know, it's not that difficult, but, you know, for some reason we just don't, you know, we haven't done it.
So the idea would maybe be something that sort of straddles the line between rules and guidelines. Like,
no, I wouldn't say straddling the line. I'd say, you know, be explicit, you know, because one of the rules of real estate success is to be predictable, to know what a predictable outcome will be, so that when a developer proposes to do something, that he can be confident that, you know, the outcome is understood by all parties, and there's not going to be lawsuits and haggles and, you know, going back and wasting people's time and, you know, hiring more lawyers at, you know, $100 an hour to resolve things that could be resolved by having clear-cut codes.
Right. That all sounds very familiar, by the way. I wanted to also ask you, like, a sort of more macrocosmic question, whether you see what's happening with this garage design and the sort of fast track to implementation as being symptomatic of larger problems in American urban planning and civic design, or do you think that this is something that's more specific to Saratoga? And also, like, maybe the connection to a prioritization of, you know, tourism at all else, and like its connection to automotive dependency.
Yeah, I think it's all of those things, and you know, Saratoga has had the benefit and the virtue of being one of the few Main Street towns in the Northeast that has really managed to keep a vigorous economy going, a robust economy going, and it's a good thing. And, you know, a big part of it is a tourist economy. You know, personally, I understand what is prompting the city center and the city officials to desperately want to provide more parking. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea. Just because they're desperate to do it doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Right.
You know, my own sense of things would be, if city officials were really smart in this town, they would have begun 10 years ago making plans to improve the railroad connections between Saratoga and other places. Because, you know, we really are at risk of getting in trouble with mass motoring in this country. There's very poor apprehension of it in the public, and very little public debate about it, really. We really need to fix the public transportation system in this country, especially the regular railroads. Look, we're not going to have high speed. You know, we missed the window of opportunity on that, probably. But we have an excellent conventional railroad system out there that used to be the envy of the world, And people would be delighted if they could get from New York City to Saratoga on trains that left on time and arrived on time.